Yeah, I think in a way it's not the right question. So, I mean, I guess if I were to answer directly, sure, I think scientific insights are considered all the time in political decision making. But scientific insights generally don't have much to do with political decision making. Politics is mostly about balancing interests and values to be able to figure out how to take action on a problem. And obviously you want to have a foundation of understanding of what the basic problem is in a factual sense. But when it comes down to it, most political decision making isn't about science. And in some ways, I think it's better to leave the science aside. Too often in politics, politicians will say, well, the science tells me this or the science tells me that. But that's just a way of not saying, here are the values and interests that I'm interested in advancing, and that's why we're doing what it is that we're doing. So often the science is actually camouflage for decision making. So I'm not really concerned about whether or not politicians use science enough in decision making. I'm more concerned that they're clear about the values that are driving their decisions and don't use science as a way to hide those values.
Well, I think the main thing that a person like myself does is try and encourage the whole of government to use evidence better in the formation of policy to go forward to the political process. If you think about policy formation, it's about providing options to the politician to make decisions. The decisions are made on many, many grounds: political, financial, ideological, diplomatic, many other considerations. But I think the major role of scientific evidence is to provide a statement of what we know and what we don't know in a way that can inform the policy process as it develops, and then once it's agreed upon, to actually evaluate the policy afterwards, which is an important part of the story. And I think with my appointment, what we've seen, it's a sign to the whole of the policy-making apparatus across the New Zealand government that the government wants to have the options that come forward properly supported by evidence. And that's actually quite a fundamental statement by a government, that they want evidence as part of the policy process clearly protected. And so my first terms of reference is actually to advise the government on the whole process of improving the use of evidence in policy formation. Secondly, obviously, because I have a lot of contact with the Prime Minister, it's a chance for him to ask me where he's thinking in different areas about how science and what the scientific perspective on it might be. And I find that because I sit in the office of the Prime Minister, that I quite often get asked by other officials just to give an informal view of how science might make for better policy advice to the government. So I think it's primarily about a statement by a government that it wants to know that evidence, that wants it clear to the policy makers that the evidence does count.
Yes, I think there is a legitimate way. I think it's entirely legitimate for democratically elected governments to spend taxpayers' money by setting strategic priorities, overall objectives, if you like, for science. So a government may choose to spend more money on research on obesity, for example, for health reasons, or to spend less money on nanoscience, or to spend new money on something else, sustainability and the rural economy. However, I think it is wrong for governments then to say where that money should be spent, which university, which institute, how it should be spent, using one methodology or research design rather than another. And crucially, it's wrong to say which person, who, should do the research. I think that's the business of the academy. So I think it's important that governments set general priorities, but they leave the particular choice of how the science will be done and who will do it to the academy. Having said that, I think it's important that governments remember that curiosity-driven research is also a priority, because it's important that we just expand knowledge, and often, of course, curiosity-driven research leads to impact in ways that were quite unforeseen. So I think a large proportion of any government's budget should be spent also on science-led questions rather than politically led questions.
Well, the question is, first of all, who are NGOs and foundations? And of course, we're talking about a very differentiated world. And I would rather say, which role do they play so far? I think NGOs share as a characteristic, most of them, that they are value-driven, that they are entrepreneurial. And this means they can move things, and they can also move people or institutions to do certain things. So on the one hand, NGOs can, if you will, instigate research, or more serious research, or more in-depth research. And on the other hand, when the research is there, they can take it out. I think a case in point is really what happened on the climate debate. Since the late 1980s, there was a notion that there was a greenhouse effect. People at NASA had found out, but nobody paid attention. And gradually, research outfits, policy, think tanks, NGOs, a variety of them, some more advocacy, some more analytical in their outlook and funding and support. They all got together to galvanize the attention of politicians. Then, for instance, in the United States, you had politicians like Al Gore getting to the fore and paying attention. And as some politicians paid attention, others would. And so the IPCC was not born out of nowhere. There was a very upset NGO community when the Rio 1992 negotiations did not bring a climate convention. But you can see that there has been a relentless push to use the science that is there, not necessarily to accept all the scientific data as a given. I think NGOs internationally and in Germany have had a major role in saying, let's adhere to the precautionary principle, and what does it mean? It's been a long way from Rio 1992 to the Energiewende we have today.